the next American president has two very, very strategic problems: how to manage withdrawal, which he's trying to do in the Middle East, right? And how to manage decline. Before starting the Middle East Eye, which was exactly 10 years ago, I'd worked for 29 years for The Guardian as a foreign correspondent in Ireland, in Europe, and Russia. And my last job for The Guardian was chief foreign leader writer. And in that capacity, I frequently met ambassadors to the UK. And I remember one confrontation in particular, or one exchange with the Israeli ambassador at the time, who was Ron Prosser, who went on to become Israel's representative at the United Nations. And I asked him who were Israel's two biggest enemies. And I expected him to say Hamas and Hezbollah. What he actually said, and he wasn't joking at all, he looked at me and said, our two biggest enemies are the BBC and The Guardian. And I took what he said seriously. I didn't regard that as a joke. I regarded that as a threat. And I left The Guardian 2 years later, in 2013. The actions of, let's say, just America, but also France, Germany, and particularly Britain, have always been self-defeating in the Middle East. Their policy, all the governments of the West advocate a two-state solution, i.e. the creation of a Palestinian state in the sort of 22% of Palestine that is left in the West Bank and in Gaza. But they are supporting a government in Israel that has absolutely vowed not to do that. In fact, they recently passed a law in the Knesset in which the entire Knesset, or most of the Knesset there, voted in favor of this motion, including Benny Gantz, i.e. the so-called liberal opposition. Everyone voted against the creation of a Palestinian state. And yet that is the official policy of the UN, China, of Russia, of every major power in the world. So why is it that America continues to arm a government that absolutely defies and continues to defy its wishes? This has been the case for decades. In fact, Biden has been much more pliant than Republican presidents have been of the past. And I'm thinking of Ronald Reagan, who told Yitzhak Shamir to stop the shelling of West Beirut.
The world can no longer accept a situation of constantly escalating violence.
In 1982, I'm thinking of H.W. Bush, Bush's father, who threatened to withdraw funds because of the actions of the settlers. These are Republican presidents who were prepared to put the screws on Israel and say no. But Biden has been absolutely pliant, and he's been personally pliant to Israel. And he's lost a lot of support as a result of that. Why? Because he's an old man. He is an instinctive and generational Zionist and supporter of Israel. He was around as a politician, when Israel was created. He's a generation that remembers the Second World War and the foundation of Israel. However, 2/3 through the war, America changed its position radically. It started by voting against any ceasefire deal in the UN and said Israel had a right to defend itself. So it permitted the slaughter, even though this was much more than a right to defend itself. It and the UK and France and Germany all voted in favor of the war continuing for many of the 10 months. Then Biden realized, it was harming him electorally in Minnesota and in Michigan and from the Arab community there, but it's harming his re-election prospects in the key swing states. But also he realized that actually the Israeli army was not winning. It hadn't defeated Hamas, and it hadn't eradicated Hamas, and that's when he decided, and it hadn't degraded Hamas significantly. So Biden changed tack and called for an immediate ceasefire in a personal address. He said this was clothed as an Israeli offer, but it wasn't. It was America saying this. And there was a resolution by the UN. Before that, under the auspices of Ian Burns, who was the director of the CIA, Hamas signed a ceasefire agreement in Cairo, negotiated in Cairo, in Doha, they signed it, which said very much the same thing. And Israel immediately backed away from it and said, no, 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 the Egyptians changed the terms. The Egyptians didn't change the terms. Now what we want is for America to apply pressure on Israel to go towards that deal. But Biden threatened, he's continued to arm Israel. And he's just signed a $20 billion arms deal with Israel. So if you look at it from Netanyahu's point of view, why on earth should he change? Biden does what he wants anyway, and Netanyahu can defy him and talk over his head and get rapturous reception in a joint session of Congress. So until actually you have an American president that's prepared to bite the bullet and say, if you do this, there will be consequences on you, Israel, and you will not like the results. But I think there's another factor here that is, which is not just about Israel defying America's wishes or Israel being the policeman that America always wants in the Middle East. It's more broadly, and I saw this as a correspondent. I was sent to Russia on the eve of the collapse of the Soviet Union, right? 1991, 1992. And I covered the first years of the Boris Yeltsin government in Russia. And at that time, America was the indisputed master of the world. It was indisputed of the economy. It had the largest army. The people of Russia were overwhelmingly pro-Western, overwhelmingly. And in 10 years, America squandered that position in Russia and then went on to have a series of liberal interventions, all wars that went wrong after 9/11. Everything that America has touched since Bosnia and Kosovo has gone wrong for America. So if you compare the position of America when I first went to Moscow in 1991, 1992, to the situation it's now in, it is literally light and dark. And it's thrown away this opportunity to create a new world order that was free of domination, that was based on equality and based on treaties. And it could have had a treaty with Russia about Europe, and particularly Ukraine, that I know very well. It could have had a treaty with China. It could have had, NATO needn't have expanded eastwards, right? There are other ways of projecting power. And even Putin arrived as an unknown on the scene in 2000, right? As a prime minister of a very ailing and ill Boris Yeltsin. He was pro-American when he started. He went on yachting trips with the two Bushes, father and son. It took 7 years for the penny to drop that his alliance with America was not an equal alliance. It was about American domination. And America was ideologically incapable of seeing things from a non-American point of view. And that is the problem. So you've got two problems in America, right? The next American president has two very, very strategic problems. How to manage withdrawal, which he is trying to do in the Middle East, right? And how to manage decline. And that is, for empires, an incredibly difficult thing to do, because its whole military-industrial complex is built on war. Its industry is built on that. Its diplomacy is built on coercion. But I think the fundamental problem with America is it's incapable of actually tailoring a foreign policy built on its own pragmatic interests and what it can do and what it can't do. If I was an American planner, I would not start wars. I would learn the mistakes from the wars, many of them, Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, all of them have ended in failure. All they've done is to wreck the countries. And even now, take one very small example, Afghanistan. Afghanistan, the West has a real problem with the Taliban over its treatment of women and women's education. However, it continues to starve Afghanistan of funds, which is the money. It's money that the Taliban need. And a former intelligence officer serving intelligence officer of Pakistan told me this. He said, it's very simple with the Taliban. There's an absolute equation. The poorer they are, the more religious they get. The richer they are, the more, it's a totally pragmatic view. And Biden not only starved them funds, it took them the funds and repurposed them. And so if you actually want to make a very pragmatic change, which would directly affect the ability of women to be educated by Iran, you give the Taliban money. I know, of course, it's the last thing that America would do because the Taliban kicked America out. But that's the pragmatic thing to do. And they're incapable, ideologically incapable, of making pragmatic decisions, which at least would de-escalate things. And Europe, and we can discuss this later, is also incapable of really standing up to America because it's got huge problems, social problems of its own. So we don't have a West that, for one reason or another, is capable of promoting, analyzing its mistakes, number one, two, promoting a new and realistic foreign policy that would advance the cause of peace and de-escalate the many conflicts that are taking place around the world. What we've got a formula for is re-escalation of conflicts. So it's all about repurposing forces to confront China. But again, we're a million miles away from the attitude that says we have made mistakes, now let's learn from them. And they're not learning, they're just repeating the same ones.